The phone hit the floor before she even realized she'd dropped it. Kayla George stood in the middle of her living room, chest tight, ears ringing, staring at the screen like it had just told her someone died. It hadn't. It was worse. A photo. Devin Chase. Her Devin. Standing at the altar in a charcoal gray suit, holding the hands of a woman so polished she looked like she'd been carved out of marble. Both of them smiling. Both of them glowing. The caption read, "He said yes to forever. Congratulations, Devin and Miranda." Kayla didn't cry right away. She just stood there, breathing, counting the cracks in the ceiling like they could hold her together. Then her knees gave. And across the city, in a glass-walled office that overlooked the entire skyline, a man sat in silence, reading a file. He hadn't slept. He rarely did. But tonight, something pulled at the edge of his attention, like a thread slowly unraveling. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose and exhaled. His assistant knocked once. "Sir, the surveillance report from the west side. There's something you should see." CO Jahan didn't look up. "Leave it." "Sir, it involves the woman from the—" "I said leave it." The assistant backed out quietly. Jihan leaned back in his chair, eyes moving slowly to the rain sliding down the window glass. Somewhere in this city, something was breaking. He could feel it the way you feel thunder before you hear it. He just didn't know yet that it was her. You need to understand something before this story goes any further. Some people ruin things, not because they're evil. They ruin things because they're scared. And fear dressed up in pride is the most dangerous kind of love story. This is that story. If you've ever waited for someone who kept making you feel invisible, stay with this. Because what happens next will reach into your chest and hold something there. Don't let this play in the background. Pull up a chair. This one deserves your full attention. If this already hit something in you, tap subscribe right now. Not because we asked, but because you know this story is yours too. And the people watching this channel are the kind who've lived through something real. Comment below and tell us, have you ever smiled at someone's happiness while your heart was quietly falling apart? Let's start there. Now, let's go back to where this all began. Kayla George grew up knowing how to hold herself together. She was the kind of woman who showed up. To work, to friendships, to the people she loved, always, without complaint, without theatrics, just solid, steady, quietly extraordinary. She'd moved to Atlanta at 24, fresh out of her master's program, with 2 suitcases, a job offer, and the kind of hope you can only afford when you haven't been hurt yet. She got a small apartment on the east side, started her career in nonprofit management, volunteered on weekends, called her mother every Sunday without fail, and somewhere in the middle of all that quiet building, she met Devin Chase. It wasn't dramatic. It never is with the ones who matter. He'd walked into a charity fundraiser she was coordinating, wearing a smile that had no business being that disarming, and asked her where the coffee was. She pointed. He went. He came back with 2 cups. "Boy, you looked like you needed one too," he said. She laughed. And that was it. That was the beginning of something that would take 7 years to fully destroy her. Devin Chase was the kind of man that made sense on paper and chaos in real life. His family had money. Old money. The kind that didn't need to be spoken about because it showed up everywhere quietly. He ran a mid-sized investment firm his father had passed down to him. He was charming, without trying. Funny, without being loud about it. And when he focused his attention on you, it felt like standing in sunlight. Kayla never told him she loved him. She almost did. Dozens of times. The words would sit right there at the back of her throat, and she'd swallow them like they were too heavy to let out. And because Devin was the kind of man who collected people's feelings and didn't always know what to do with them after. She'd watched him cycle through women who threw themselves at him. She'd watched him smile, enjoy it, and move on. She told herself she was being smart, protecting herself. She wasn't. She was just waiting, and hoping, and pretending that the friendship they had was enough when it was never, ever enough. They talked every day, argued about ridiculous things. He'd call her at 11 at night just to ask if she thought pineapple belonged on pizza. She'd hang up on him. He'd call back, laughing. "Kayla, just answer the question." "Good night, Devin." It's a simple yes or no. Click. She'd smile in the dark of her room like an absolute fool. Phone on her chest, heart embarrassingly full. Their friends saw it, and even strangers saw it. There was a running joke in their circle that Devin and Kayla were the slowest love story in Atlanta. Everyone was waiting for the moment one of them finally said it out loud. That moment never came, because Devin Chase was afraid. Not of Kayla specifically. He was afraid of what she represented. Kayla wasn't a casual thing. She wasn't something you tried and let go of. She was the kind of woman you chose permanently. And permanent things scared Devin in ways he couldn't explain even to himself. So he kept her close enough to feel safe and far enough to avoid commitment. And Kayla, because she loved him the way quiet people love, stayed right where he kept her. In that warm, ambiguous in-between space that fed her just enough to keep her from leaving. She didn't know it was slowly hollowing her out. On one Thursday evening, their friend Marcus hosted a small dinner at his place. 9 people crammed around a table meant for 6, plates of jerk chicken and plantain going around, everyone talking over each other the way old friends do. Devin sat across from Kayla. They spent most of the meal throwing invisible comments at each other through eye contact. She raised an eyebrow at him when Marcus made a terrible joke. Devin pressed his lips together, fighting a smile. She looked away first. He watched her for exactly 3 seconds too long. Marcus noticed. He always noticed. Later, while they were washing up in the kitchen, Marcus pulled Devin aside. "Bro, when are you going to just say it?" Devin didn't pretend not to know what he meant. He just rinsed a dish and said nothing. 7 years, Devin. Marcus? 7 years. Devin set the dish down. It's complicated. Marcus looked at him with the flat, unimpressed face of a man who had heard that word used to justify too many cowardly decisions. It really isn't, he said. You're scared. That's it. That's the whole complicated thing. Devin didn't respond. At some point, Marcus said quietly, she's going to stop waiting, and you're going to spend the rest of your life watching some other man be everything you were too scared to be. Devin laughed it off, picked up the dish again, changed the subject. But that night, driving home alone, Marcus's words followed him like a second passenger in the car. He didn't sleep well. The next week was when things began to turn. Devin started noticing other men noticing Kayla. He'd never really paid attention before. Or maybe he had and chosen to file it away neatly, but now it was impossible to ignore. At a gallery opening downtown, a man named Ethan, tall, architect type, easy smile, spent 40 minutes talking to Kayla near the wine table. Kayla was laughing, real laughing, the kind Devin usually got to see, her head tilted, her hand lightly touching the man's arm as she made a point. Devin stood 15 feet away holding an untouched glass of red wine, jaw tight. He told himself he wasn't jealous. He was absolutely jealous. The drive home that night, he and Kayla walked to their cars together like always. She was relaxed, happy. She told him Ethan was a nice guy, that they might grab coffee sometime. Devin said, "Cool." The word came out flatter than he meant it to. Kayla glanced at him. "You okay?" "Fine," he said. "So just tired." She looked at him for a second, the way she always did when she knew he was lying but chose not to press. "Okay. Good night, Devin." She drove away. He sat in his parked car for 11 minutes, staring at nothing. Something uncomfortable was moving around inside his chest. Something he didn't know how to name because naming it would require admitting things he wasn't ready to admit. So instead of doing the honest thing, Devon Chase did what emotionally blocked, pride-soaked men have done throughout the entire history of bad decisions. He made a plan. Not a good plan. Not a mature plan. A plan built entirely out of ego dressed up as strategy. He told himself it was calculated. He told himself it would work. He told himself that if Kayla saw him with someone else, someone serious, she would finally show her hand. Finally admit what everyone already knew. Finally give him the reaction he could point to and say, "See? She wants me." And then he could decide what to do from a position of power instead of vulnerability. The problem with plans like that is that they always assume the other person will behave the way you need them to. They never account for someone having more dignity than you expected. Devon met Miranda Holt at an industry event 3 weeks later. Miranda was the kind of woman who walked into rooms and made sure everyone knew she'd arrived. She was beautiful in a deliberate, high-maintenance way. Sharp, strategic. She had her own money and her own agenda, and she was very clear about what she wanted from Devon, which was mostly access to his business connections and a title. Well, no, they were compatible the way two people can be compatible when neither of them is actually invested. Devon moved fast, deliberately fast, faster than any of his previous situationships. He started posting dinners, events, weekend trips, Miranda in every frame. And within 2 months, the rumors had hardened into something official. Devon Chase was in a serious relationship. Kayla heard about it the way you hear about most things that gut punch you, casually, through a group chat message that wasn't even aimed at her. Someone sent a photo. Devon and Miranda at a rooftop restaurant, his hand on the small of her back, her head tilted toward his shoulder. Kayla put her phone down, picked it up again. Put it down. She texted Devon, "Is this real?" He called her back immediately, too quickly, like he'd been waiting. "Hey," he said. Is it real?" A pause. "Yeah, Miranda and I are together." Another pause. Longer this time. Kayla's side of the line. "Okay," she said finally. Her voice was level, controlled. "That's great, Devon. I hope you're happy." Kayla. "I have to go. I'll talk to you later." She hung up. And that's when Devon realized something had gone wrong with his plan. She hadn't fought, hadn't cried on the phone, hadn't asked any of the questions he'd rehearsed answers for. She had simply said, "Okay," and hung up. He sat with that for a moment, waiting for the feeling of victory to arrive. It didn't. He texted her twice that week. She responded. Normally, pleasantly. Asked how work was going. Mentioned a podcast she thought he'd like. Nothing that indicated anything was wrong. Nothing that gave him what he was looking for. No jealousy. No longing. No crack in the surface. He didn't understand it. What he didn't see was what happened behind the door of her apartment every night that week. Kayla George cried in the shower. She cried quietly, which is the worst kind, because it means you're used to holding it in even when it's tearing you apart. She sat on the bathroom floor with the water running hot until it turned cold, and she let herself feel every bit of what she'd been sitting on for 7 years. She didn't blame Devon in those moments. She blamed herself. For waiting. For hoping. For building a life around someone who was never holding space for her in return. She called her sister on Friday night. "I'm done," she said. Simply. Finally. "Done waiting?" her sister asked. "Done everything." A long pause. Then her sister said very gently, "Good." That was all. But it landed like a key turning in a lock. Over the next few weeks, something shifted in Kayla. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet shift that happens when a woman finally stops arranging herself around someone else's comfort. She started making plans she hadn't let herself make before. A transfer opportunity had come up at work, a regional director position in a city 3 hours away. She'd been sitting on it for 2 months, telling herself she'd think about it later. She stopped thinking and started applying. She also started showing up differently. She went out more, laughed more. Let herself be present in conversations without the background hum of wondering what Devon would think. She went to that coffee meeting with Ethan, the architect. It was fine, pleasant, nothing earth-shattering, but it reminded her that there were men in the world who looked at her and saw something worth pursuing. That helped more than she expected. Devon, meanwhile, was receiving the exact opposite of what he'd been hoping for. Miranda was not what he had anticipated in practice. What worked on paper, two independent people with clear boundaries and mutual benefit, became suffocating in reality. Miranda did not do gray areas. She called at exact times and expected to be answered. She had opinions about his friends, his schedule, his wardrobe, and she expressed those opinions with the quiet authority of someone who had already decided they were correct. Devon started to feel the walls closing in about 6 weeks into the relationship. The thing about a cage built from your own choices is that you can't exactly complain about it to anyone. And he'd made this very publicly, announced it very deliberately. Walking it back wasn't something his pride would allow, so he stayed. And it got worse. But even then, his first instinct was always to wonder what Kayla thought. He'd catch himself reaching for his phone to call her the way he used to, then stopping. Something felt different. She was still there when he texted, still warm. But there was a space in her responses now, a small, careful distance that hadn't been there before. He didn't like it. He went to Marcus again. This was becoming a habit. "She's pulling back," Devon said. They were at a sports bar, a game playing on the screen neither of them was watching. Marcus turned to look at him with an expression that could only be described as the face of a man who had absolutely no patience left. "Devon, you're in a relationship, with someone else, that you started on purpose. I know. Then why are you sitting here talking to me about Kayla?" Devon was quiet. Marcus leaned forward. "Let me ask you something straight. Do you love her?" No answer. "Do you love Miranda?" Still nothing. "Devon, I don't know, Marcus." "You do know," Marcus said quietly. "That's the problem. You've known for a long time. You're just hoping if you sit still long enough, the decision will make itself." Devon picked up his drink. That is exactly what it is," Marcus said. "And I'll tell you right now, while you're sitting here hoping she'll wait, she is over there figuring out how to live without you. And once a woman like Kayla figures that out, Devon, there's no undoing it." Devon looked at the ice at the bottom of his glass. Marcus sat back. I really hope you figure yourself out before it's too late. I genuinely do." The game played on. Devon didn't see any of it. He texted Kayla that night, something casual, asked if she'd watched a show they used to follow together. She replied an hour later. "Haven't had time lately. Been busy with something exciting. I'll tell you about it when it's confirmed." He read that 3 times. Something exciting? That was new. He wanted to ask. He stopped himself. Typed and deleted 4 different responses before settling on, "Sounds good. Let me know." She sent a small thumbs-up emoji. He stared at his phone screen like it had personally wronged him. 2 weeks later, she told him. A text. Casual, almost cheerful. "Got the promotion. Taking the transfer. Moving to Charlotte in 6 weeks." Devon read it once, then again. Then he put the phone face down on the desk, stood up, walked to the window of his office, and stood there for a very long time, looking out at a city that was suddenly, inexplicably, too quiet. She was leaving. She was actually leaving. He'd pushed and tested and waited for her to react, and her reaction had been to pack her things and walk out of the entire city. He picked his phone back up and called her. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey!" There was lightness in her voice, actual lightness, not the kind she performed for him, the real kind. "Charlotte?" he said. "Charlotte," she confirmed. "I'm excited. It's a big step. You're not going to—" He stopped himself. "Not going to what?" He couldn't finish the sentence because the end of it was, "You're not going to fight for us." And there was no us. and he had made sure of that, so he had absolutely no standing to say any of it. "Nothing," he said. "That's great, Kayla. Congratulations." "Thank you." A small pause. "You okay?" "Of course," he said. "Why wouldn't I be?" The brightness in her voice softened just slightly. Not with longing, with something closer to understanding. Like she already knew the answer, and was deciding not to make it harder for either of them. "Take care of yourself, Devin." "You too." She hung up. He stood in his office alone for a long time after that. The city below moved on as cities do. Cars, people, lives in motion. And Devin Chase stood in the middle of all that motion, perfectly still, finally beginning to understand the size of what he had done. This is the moment. Right here. Pause the story in your mind just for a second. Has anyone ever made you feel like you were their backup plan while you were treating them like they were everything? Like you were first in line in your own heart, but somewhere near the bottom of theirs? If that's ever been you, say something in the comments. Don't scroll past this moment. The people watching this channel are not here for noise. They're here because they've lived through something. And your story, even just 3 words of it, might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Stay with us. It gets heavier before it gets better. Charlotte was a beginning. Kayla arrived with 2 suitcases and a clarity she hadn't known was possible. She found a clean 1-bedroom apartment with good light, close to her new office. She bought plants, cooked real meals, walked to the farmer's market on Saturdays. She video called her mother more, laughed more, slept without the background weight of someone else's confusion pressing down on her. She wasn't pretending to be okay. She actually was. That surprised her at first. She'd expected the grief to follow her, and it did, in small ways. A song would come on. She'd reach for her phone to share it with Devin before remembering. But the reaching got slower. The pause before stopping got longer. The grief was present, but it was shrinking, the way grief does when you stop feeding it and start feeding yourself instead. She threw herself into the new role. Her team was sharp. The work was meaningful. Within 2 months, she had restructured 3 programs and brought in 2 new funding partnerships. Her director called her a force. She smiled at that, quietly, privately. She also made new friends. For her neighbor, a retired teacher named Gloria, who had opinions about everything and delivered them with 0 apology. A woman from her office, Tunde, originally from Nigeria, who made Kayla laugh until her stomach hurt at least twice a week. Small things. Real things. She dated a little. Nothing serious. A second date here. A pleasant dinner there. She wasn't looking for lightning. She was just reminding herself she was still in the world, and the world still had things to offer. She had almost, fully exhaled. Which is exactly when the universe decided to introduce something new into her equation. It started with a complication at work. One of their major funding partners, a private investment group, suddenly froze their grant mid-cycle. No warning, no formal explanation, just a letter citing portfolio restructuring and a wire transfer that never arrived. $60,000. Gone. And with it, 2 programs serving vulnerable youth in the area. Kayla went into damage control, called the investment group's liaison, got nothing. Called the regional office, got bounced around for 4 days. She started pulling other funding leads, worked late, came in early. She was not going to let kids lose access to those programs because some suits uptown decided to quietly rearrange their priorities without a phone call. On a Wednesday evening, exhausted, she was sitting at a coffee shop near her office with a stack of documents and a very strong Americano when the chair across from her was pulled out. She looked up, ready to explain that the seat was taken by the imaginary version of herself that had actually eaten lunch today, and stopped. The man standing across from her was not someone you looked away from quickly. Tall, Korean, somewhere in his mid-30s. His face was the kind of calm that didn't come from having an easy life. It came from having survived enough of a hard one that nothing could shake you anymore. Dark eyes, no expression she could read. A dark coat, no tie, shirt collar open by one button, which on most men might look casual, but on him looked deliberate. He didn't smile. He said, in perfectly clear English with a faint accent, "My apologies. Is this seat free?" "No," she said. "I mean, yes. Sorry, yes, it's free." He sat, opened a slim folder, said nothing else. She looked back at her documents. 3 minutes of silence passed. Oh, useful. Working silence. Then her papers slid. She grabbed for them. One sheet escaped and floated to the floor near his chair. He picked it up without being asked, held it out without looking. She reached for it. Her fingers caught the edge just as he let it go, and for exactly 1 second, their hands were both holding the same page, and she glanced up and found him already looking at her. Not in a way that was intrusive, just in a way that meant he had noticed everything already. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, went back to his folder. They sat in that coffee shop for another 40 minutes, both working, not speaking. When she finally began packing up to leave, she stood, gathered her coat, and he said without looking up, "The firm is KSH Capital." She stopped. He looked up then. "The investment group that froze your funding. It's a subsidiary of KSH Capital." He held her gaze. "You've been calling the wrong number for 4 days." She stared at him. "How do you know what I've been?" "This is a small city for certain conversations," he said. "Try the main office. Ask for Director Lim. Tell her Jahan sent you." He went back to his folder like the conversation was over. Kayla stood there for a full 5 seconds, with her mouth not quite closed. "I'm sorry. Who are you exactly?" He looked up again. That same expression. Unreadable. Patient. Someone who was in the right coffee shop. She should have pushed. She had 1,000 follow-up questions. Instead, she said, "Thank you," picked up her bag, and walked out. She called Director Lim the next morning. The funding was unfrozen within 48 hours. Kayla sat at her desk, staring at the confirmation email with a deeply unsettled feeling that she was going to need to understand better. Someone had just moved something that had been immovable for 2 weeks, with one word. His name. Jihan. She didn't even know his last name. She went back to that coffee shop on Thursday evening on the thin pretense of needing a quiet place to work. She told herself she was not looking for him. She ordered her Americano, found a table, opened her laptop. He was there 15 minutes later. He took the same seat across from her without asking this time. Opened his folder. Said nothing. She waited 60 seconds. "You never told me your name," she said. "You never asked," he replied. She blinked. "I'm asking now." He looked up. "Seo Jihan." She considered him for a moment. "The funding came through." "I know. You didn't have to do that." "No," he said, with the tone of a man confirming a fact rather than accepting thanks. "I didn't." "Then why?" He studied her for a moment. Not with warmth exactly. With something more careful than warmth. Something that paid very close attention. "Because the programs were worth protecting," he said, "and the people running them were working too hard to be undermined by a clerical misdirection." Kayla looked at him for a long second. "Clerical misdirection. Is that what that was?" The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The smallest possible suggestion of one. "Have dinner with me," he said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't a demand either. It sat somewhere unusual in between, like an offer he was extending without urgency, without agenda, and without the performance that men usually wrapped around those 3 words. Kayla looked at him carefully. This man who had appeared from nowhere, fixed an unfixable problem, and was now sitting across from her at a coffee shop like he belonged there. "I don't know anything about you," she said. "That's what dinner is for," he said. She should have said no. She almost did. But there was something about the steadiness of him, the complete absence of effort in how he sat in the world, that made her feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Safe. Not in a soft way. In the way you feel safe standing near something so solid and unmovable that nothing can get to you while it's there. "One dinner," she said. "One dinner," he agreed. Back in Atlanta, Devon Chase's life was in the middle of a very quiet, very thorough unraveling. The business was struggling. He'd had 3 key investors pull out in the same quarter. 2 contracts had fallen through on technicalities that shouldn't have been there. His CFO had resigned, citing concerns about the direction of the firm. Devon told himself it was the market. A rough patch. It happened. Miranda's response to his stress was to become more controlling, not less. She started attending his business meetings uninvited, giving opinions on decisions that were not hers to make. When he pulled back, she escalated. When he tried to establish space, she took it as a slight and retaliated with silence, so cold it changed the temperature of a room. He was miserable. He called his father for advice. His father, a quietly perceptive man, listened and then said, "Son, when did you last talk to Kayla?" Devon paused. She moved to Charlotte." "I know," his father said. "When did you last talk to her?" Devon didn't answer. His father sighed. "Fix the things that can be fixed, and stop ignoring what you already know." Devon sat with that for days. He finally called her on a Sunday afternoon. She answered, warm as ever, asked how he was. He told her work was hard. She listened. Asked real questions. Didn't minimize it. Didn't offer empty reassurance. Just listened and engaged the way she always had. After 20 minutes, he felt more clear-headed than he had in months. When they hung up, he sat in the quiet of his apartment and realized something awful. He had gotten rid of the one person who made him better at being himself. And he had done it on purpose, for a game. Devon Chase put his head in his hands and sat with that for a very long time. Devon didn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark of his bedroom, Miranda breathing evenly beside him, and stared at the ceiling like it owed him an answer. The apartment was expensive. The sheets were expensive. Everything around him had been chosen for how it looked to other people, and none of it felt like anything. He thought about Kayla at 25, sitting cross-legged on his kitchen counter, eating cereal at midnight because she'd come over after a long shift and didn't want to go home to an empty apartment yet. She'd talked about her dreams that night, the things she wanted to build, the kind of life she was working toward. He'd listened and thought, without saying it, that whoever ended up loving her properly was going to be the luckiest person on earth. He'd thought that. About her. And then driven home from his own thoughts, like they were a neighborhood he didn't belong in. He pressed his palms over his eyes. Outside, Atlanta hummed and moved and lived without caring about any of his regrets. That was the thing about cities. They didn't slow down for your personal crisis. The world kept its pace. You either caught up or you got left behind. Devon was beginning to feel very, very left behind. He made a decision at 3 in the morning, the way bad decisions are often made, in the dark, without a plan, powered entirely by desperation. He was going to go to Charlotte. He was going to see Kayla. He was going to say the things he should have said years ago and let whatever happened happen. It felt like courage. It was not courage. It was panic wearing courage's coat. He told Miranda he had a business trip. She looked at him with narrowed eyes and said nothing. Which was somehow worse than if she'd argued. He drove to Charlotte on a Friday. He hadn't told Kayla he was coming. That was his first mistake. There would be others. He found her office building with no trouble. Sat in his car across the street for 20 minutes. Talked himself in and out of going in 4 separate times. Finally got out of the car. He was halfway across the street when the front doors of the building opened. Kayla walked out. She was laughing. Head back, real laugh. the full one that Devon had always privately considered one of the best sounds in the world. She had her coat half on, bag over her shoulder, already mid-conversation with someone beside her. That someone was Seo Jihan. Devon stopped in the middle of the street. Jihan was saying something. Low. Probably not even funny to anyone else. But Kayla was still smiling from it. And Jihan was watching her with the particular expression of a man who has already decided that whatever she does next, he wants to see it. Devon had never once looked at anyone the way that man was looking at Kayla right now. He stood on that pavement, completely invisible to both of them, and felt something inside his chest collapse quietly, like a building settling into old ground. Kayla turned, still smiling, and said something to Jihan. He nodded once. She started walking toward the parking area. Jihan turned, and for 1 second, his eyes swept the street with the automatic, unhurried attention of a man who never fully switches off. His gaze landed on Devon, held for 2 seconds, then moved on. Like Devon was simply part of the scenery. And Devon got back in his car. He sat there for a long time. Then he started the engine, pulled out onto the street, and drove back toward the highway. He didn't call her. He just drove. Now, before this story goes any further, we need to stop here for a moment. Because this right here, this scene on the pavement, Devon seeing what he lost, and Jihan not even needing to try. This is the kind of moment that splits people into 2 camps. Some of you watching are thinking, good, he deserved that. And some of you are thinking, but he still loves her. Doesn't that count for something? Drop your honest answer in the comments right now. Does love count if it only shows up after someone walks away? The people in this community don't do surface answers. You've lived too much for that. And if this story is pulling at something you've carried, you belong here. Hit subscribe. Because the people watching this channel are the kind who understand that love is not just a feeling. It's a series of choices. And some of us chose wrong. And some of us paid for someone else's wrong choice. Either way, you have a seat here. Now let's keep going. The dinner with Jihan had happened 2 weeks before Devon's silent visit to Charlotte. It was at a quiet Korean restaurant in the city. Not flashy, not performative. Just good food, low light, and a table in the back corner where no one could overhear them. Kayla arrived 3 minutes early and spent those 3 minutes telling herself this was casual, informational. She was simply having dinner with an unusual man who had done her an unusual favor. Nothing more. Jihan arrived exactly on time. Of course he did. He ordered in Korean without looking at the menu, then looked at her and said, "Do you trust me to order for you? I can explain everything. Or you can choose for yourself. Either is fine." She looked at him for a moment. "Order for me," he ordered. The food arrived in careful stages, and it was extraordinary, every plate. Kayla took her first bite of something she couldn't name, and closed her eyes for half a second. "Okay," she said. "You have good taste." "I have opinions," he said. "They happen to be correct." She laughed. He watched her. That careful, full attention way of his. "Tell me about the programs," he said. She told him. He listened the way rare people listen, not waiting for a pause to insert himself, not performing engagement, just actually absorbing everything she said. Asked 2 specific, intelligent questions. Offered one observation that reframed a challenge she'd been stuck on for weeks in a way that made her slightly annoyed at how useful it was. "Do you work in nonprofit funding?" she asked. "No." "Then how do you know this much about it?" "I know a lot about a lot of things," he said simply. "It's useful." She studied him across the table. "What exactly do you do, Seo Jihan?" He met her eyes. "I manage resources." "That's very broad." "It is." "Deliberately broad?" The corner of his mouth, that almost smile again. "Partly." She decided not to push it. Not yet. There was something about this man that rewarded patience, like a book that didn't give up its best lines until you'd earned them by reading carefully. Instead, she said, "Why did you help me?" The real reason. He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, just thinking. The way someone thinks when they're deciding how much of the truth to give. "The firm that froze your funding made an error in judgment," he said. "I dislike errors in judgment, especially ones that hurt people who are doing important work. And you just happened to be in a position to fix it." "Yes." She looked at him carefully. "Are you always in a position to fix things?" He held her gaze. "Often." That should have been unsettling. Somehow it wasn't. Somehow, it was the most honest thing a man had said to her in years. They talked for 2 hours. She found out that he was from Seoul, had spent years between Korea, the United States, and several other countries she didn't ask about yet. He had a younger sister he clearly adored, but spoke about with restraint. He liked silence, rain, and extremely bitter coffee. And he did not like small talk, which explained why he didn't do it. He asked her about her family, her work, where she grew up, the things that made her who she was. No one had asked her those things in a long time. Devin had known her so long he'd stopped asking. But Jihan asked like he was genuinely building a picture, adding careful detail by careful detail. When they left the restaurant, they stood outside on the quiet street for a moment. "This was good," she said. "It was," he agreed. "You're an unusual person," she told him. "I've been told." She smiled. "Thank you. For dinner. And for the other thing." He nodded once, and then, without any of the usual posturing or pretense men inserted into these moments, he said, "I'd like to do this again. Not soon. Not whenever you're free. Not let me know if you want to. Just that. A clean and direct." She looked at him for a second. "Okay," she said. She drove home with the windows down despite the cold, because she needed air, because something in her chest was moving around in a way she hadn't felt in a long time, and she needed to be very careful about what she called it. She called her sister. "I met someone," she said. "Already?" "It's not like that. You called me at 11 o'clock at night. I just wanted to tell someone." Her sister was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then, "Tell me everything." They saw each other 5 more times over the next 3 weeks, always for dinner, always unhurried. The conversations went deeper each time, not in a forced way, but the way water finds its level naturally. He was not easy to know. He offered things slowly, but what he offered was real. She found out he ran a business empire that stretched across several industries. She found out he'd built most of it himself, from a starting point he was careful about, but didn't entirely hide. She found out that people were afraid of him, which she could feel in how others moved around him in public, always at a slight distance, always a little too quick to accommodate. She asked him about it directly one evening. "People seem nervous around you," she said. He looked at her. "Do you?" She considered that honestly. "No." "Then that's all that matters," he said. It was not all that mattered. She knew that. There were things about Seo Jihan that existed in the space between his words, in the deliberate boundaries of what he chose not to say, like in the particular kind of calm that comes not from gentleness, but from certainty that nothing will catch you off guard, because you've already seen most of what the world can throw. But here was the thing. He was honest with her about what he was willing to share and what he wasn't. He didn't pretend. He didn't perform. When she asked a question he wouldn't answer, he said so plainly. When he wanted something, he said it plainly. When he looked at her, he wasn't managing her or calculating her. He was just looking. She hadn't been looked at like that in 7 years, maybe ever. What she didn't know yet was the full shape of the world he moved in. She knew the edges of it, the authority, the reach, the way things resolved themselves in his direction without apparent effort. She had filed these things under powerful businessman and left them there. The truth was more layered. Back in Atlanta, Things were getting worse for Devon in every direction at once. 3 more investors had withdrawn from his firm. The reasons given were professional, polite, and almost identical in language, which was the kind of coincidence that wasn't a coincidence. His legal team had flagged 2 pending contracts with irregularities that were going to take months to resolve. His CFO's replacement lasted 6 weeks and quit without explanation. Devon hired a private advisor to look at the pattern. The advisor came back looking uncomfortable. "Someone is in your supply chain," the advisor told him. "Quietly, methodically. This is not random market movement. Someone is applying pressure." Devon stared at him. "Who?" "I don't know. But they're very good at not being visible." Devon spent a week chasing shadows. Got nowhere. The pressure continued, slow and consistent, like water finding its way through rock. Miranda, sensing the instability, began extracting herself. Not dramatically, just strategically. Less availability. More distance. The fake marriage Devon had built was becoming expensive in every way imaginable, and she was not the kind of woman to go down with a ship she hadn't built. Devon saw it happening. Couldn't stop it. Didn't have the energy to try. He called Marcus. "Someone is dismantling my business," he said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Do you have enemies?" "Every businessman has enemies. I mean real ones, the kind with enough reach to move multiple investors in the same direction without being seen," Devon thought. "No, not that I know of." Another pause. Then Marcus said carefully, "Devon, what do you know about the man Kayla is seeing?" Devon went very still. "How do you know about that?" "Because I still talk to Kayla, because I have eyes, and because the timing of your problems lines up in a way that I think you should think about very carefully." Devon didn't respond. "I'm not saying anything," Marcus said. "I'm just suggesting you pay attention to what's around you." After he hung up, Devon sat for a long time. C.O. Jihan. He didn't have a last name before. Now he had a full one, and he didn't know what to do with it. He searched it. The results were substantial but not deep. Business coverage, industry profiles, a few photographs from charity events where Jihan stood at the edge of frames, never at the center. A man who had a very public name and a very private footprint. Devon read for 3 hours. By the end of it, he understood 2 things clearly. First, Seo Jihan was not simply a businessman. He was the kind of man that words like businessman barely covered, the way a coat barely covers armor. Second, Devon had been completely outclassed in every possible way. Not financially, not professionally, in every way that actually mattered. In patience, in intention, in the willingness to choose someone fully without conditions. He closed his laptop. The room was quiet. Miranda's things were already half gone from the closet. He hadn't noticed until now. He sat in that silence and let the full weight of it land on him without trying to move out of the way. In Charlotte, on a Thursday evening, Kayla was in Jihan's car on the way back from an art exhibition he had taken her to. She hadn't expected to enjoy it. She'd expected to feel slightly out of her depth. Instead, she had spent 2 hours discovering that she had very strong opinions about contemporary art, and that Jihan found this interesting rather than overwhelming. They were stopped at a red light, the city glittering and moving outside the windows. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice had a different quality, not heavier exactly, more deliberate. She turned to look at him. He was watching the road. "Okay," she said. "The work I do. The full scope of it." A pause. "There are parts of it that operate outside of what most people consider conventional business." She held very still. "I want you to understand what that means before we go any further," he said. "Not because I'm asking permission, because you deserve to make a clear choice." The light turned green. He drove. "Are you telling me you're dangerous?" she asked. "I'm telling you that I am not entirely what I appear to be in public contexts." She thought about all the small things she'd noticed and filed away. The way rooms adjusted themselves when he walked in. The speed with which the frozen funding had moved. The two men she'd noticed twice in the past week, who seemed to be in the same place as she was. "Those men," she said. "The ones I've been seeing." A pause. "Yes." "You sent them?" "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "Why?" "Because someone from your previous life has been making inquiries about where you are," he said. "I preferred to ensure you were not bothered." Devon. She knew it immediately. Jihan. "You're not in danger," he said quickly, hearing the shift in her voice. "I want to be clear about that. I simply preferred caution." She looked at the side of his face, the jaw, the calm. The man who had quietly wrapped a circle of protection around her without telling her, and was now, instead of pretending it hadn't happened, choosing to be honest. "What exactly are you?" she asked quietly. He glanced at her then, just briefly, then back to the road. "Someone who chooses carefully," he said, "and I have chosen you. I wanted you to know what that choice comes with." The car was quiet for a moment. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I know. But I need you to not make decisions about my safety without telling me first." He was quiet for a second. Then, "That's fair. And I need you to understand that I am not someone you protect by keeping me in the dark." Another pause. Longer. "I understand," he said. And he meant it. She could tell by the way he said it. Not performing agreement, actually recalibrating. She looked out the window at the city rolling by. She should have been afraid. Part of her distantly registered that this was the reasonable response, but the fear kept not arriving. Instead, there was something else, something complicated and warm and serious. He pulled up outside her building. Neither of them moved immediately. "The man making inquiries," she said. "Devon." "Yes." "What have you done about his business?" Silence. "Jihan." "Nothing permanent," he said carefully. "Nothing he cannot recover from if he chooses to." She turned to look at him fully. That needs to stop." He met her eyes. "Done." Just like that. No argument. No justification. She said, "Stop," and he said, "Done." The ease of it frightened her almost more than the action had. "I don't want to be the reason someone's life falls apart," she said. "You're not," he said. "His choices made that foundation. I simply tested it. It was already weak." She sat with that for a moment. "I'm still mad at you a little," she said. "I know. You should have told me." "Yes." She got out of the car, stood at the open door for a moment. He was watching her with that steady, full attention expression that had unsettled her from the first evening at the coffee shop. "Good night, Jihan," she said. "Good night, Kayla." She went inside, stood in her apartment hallway, back against the door, eyes on the ceiling. This man, on this absolutely unprecedented, infuriating, quietly extraordinary man. She stayed there for a full minute. Then she pushed off the wall, went to the kitchen, and made herself tea, which she did not drink, because she was too busy thinking. She called her sister again. "He's not exactly what I thought," she said. Her sister was quiet for a second. "Is he good to you?" Kayla thought about it. All of it. The coffee shop, the funding, the dinners, the honesty in that car. "Yes," she said. "Then pay attention to that," her sister said. "The rest you figure out as you go." Devon came to Charlotte again. This time he called first. Kayla agreed to meet him for coffee because she wasn't the kind of woman who hid from things. They met at a neutral place, a coffee shop near a park. Devon arrived early. Kayla arrived on time. She looked different. He couldn't name exactly how. It wasn't her hair or her clothes. It was something in how she sat in herself. Like the constant low-grade tension he'd always sensed in her, that holding pattern feeling she used to carry, was gone. She was just present. Fully. Simply present. It wrecked him. "You look good," he said. "Thank you," she said pleasantly. "How are you?" He'd planned a speech. 3 versions of it, actually. He had even practiced in the car. But looking at her now across the table, all three versions dissolved. "I made a mistake," he said. She held her coffee cup and looked at him. "Several of them," he continued, "over a long period of time. And I think some part of me knew, while I was making them, that they were wrong. And I did it anyway." She was quiet. "I was scared," he said, "of what it meant to actually choose you. Because choosing you meant being serious, being real. And I didn't know how to be real about something that mattered that much." Kayla looked at him for a long moment. Her expression wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was something more difficult to argue with. It was complete. "Devin," she said gently, "I believe you." He felt a small surge of something. "But believing you," she continued, "doesn't change anything." The something deflated. "I'm not angry at you," she said. "I was. For a while. But I'm not anymore. What I am is different now. I spent a long time waiting for you to choose me. And while I was waiting, I was becoming less of myself. Smaller. More careful. Like I was always halfway waiting to exhale." She paused. "I exhaled, Devin. Finally. And I'm not holding my breath again." He looked at the table. "Is it him? Jihan." She didn't flinch. "It's me," she said. "It was always going to be about me eventually." "But you're with him." "Yes," she said simply. Devin was quiet for a long time. "Is he good to you?" She looked at him steadily. "Yes." He nodded, looked at his coffee, looked out the window at the park where people were walking dogs and pushing strollers and living their uncomplicated Friday afternoons. "I should have said it," he said quietly. "Years ago. I should have just said it." "Yes," she said. "You should have." She said it without cruelty, just clearly. The truth, offered without decoration. Devin nodded again, stood up after a moment. "I hope you're happy, Kayla. I really do." She looked up at him, and for just a second, something moved across her face. Not a second thought. Not longing. Just compassion. The kind you feel for someone you cared about deeply, who couldn't get out of their own way. "Take care of yourself, Devin," she said, "and fix your life. Not for me. For you." He left. She sat with her coffee for another 10 minutes alone. Then she got up, walked out into the mild afternoon, and called Jihan. He answered on the second ring. "How did it go?" "Fine," she said. "I'm fine." A pause. "Good." She started walking toward her car. "I was thinking, dinner tonight. Your choice." She could hear the almost smile. "I'll pick you up at 7. 7, she confirmed. She hung up and stood in the parking lot for a moment, face tilted toward the pale afternoon sky. She breathed in, breathed out. There was no earthquake in her chest, no storm, just a quiet steadiness, the kind that doesn't make for a dramatic story, but makes for an extraordinary life. She had learned the hard way that love was not supposed to cost you your peace. It was not supposed to keep you in a permanent state of waiting. It was not supposed to feel like something you had to earn over and over again from someone who wasn't sure they wanted to give it. Real love, she was beginning to understand, felt like what she felt when Jihan picked up the phone. Steady, present, chosen. Weeks passed. Life moved. The programs at her organization were fully funded again, better positioned than before. Her team flourished. She flourished. Jihan moved between his work and Charlotte with a consistency that said, quietly and without performance, that wherever she was mattered to him. He was not easy. She wouldn't have trusted easy. He had a world that she was only partially inside of, and there were evenings when the weight of that world sat in the room with them. But he was honest. He was consistent. And when she pushed back on something, he listened. Actually listened. Not to manage her, to understand her. One night they were sitting on her couch, both reading, the apartment quiet. She looked up at him for no reason, and he looked up at exactly the same moment as if he'd felt it. They looked at each other, across the quiet room. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "Just checking." "Checking what?" She smiled. "That you're real." He looked at her for a long second. Then he reached across and tucked a strand of hair back from her face. Just that. Nothing more. "I'm real," he said. She went back to her book. He went back to his. And in the entire long story of her life, in all the big moments, and the dramatic ones, and the ones she had thought would define her, this quiet Tuesday evening on a couch in Charlotte, with a man who meant every word he said, would be the one she remembered first. Devon Chase did rebuild. Slowly, after the investors stopped pulling back and the contracts started clearing, he put his head down and did the unglamorous work of earning back what he'd spent so casually. He ended things with Miranda finally, which she took with the graceful efficiency of a woman who had already moved her interests elsewhere anyway. He was better after that. Quieter. Less performance, more substance. He still thought about Kayla sometimes, not with longing exactly, with something closer to gratitude, because she had been honest with him even when she had every right to make it hurt. And that kind of honesty was a gift he hadn't deserved and had received anyway. He sent her a message on her birthday. Short, clean. Just, "Happy birthday. Hope it's a good one." She replied 3 hours later. "It is. Thank you, Devon." That was enough. That was, surprisingly and genuinely, exactly enough. And Seo Jihan, the man who had moved resources and removed obstacles and quietly arranged himself between Kayla and anything that might harm her, the man who had been called many things in many rooms and had never asked anyone to call him good, sat across from her at a small table at a restaurant in the city on a Thursday evening, watching her argue passionately about whether a particular dish needed more ginger, and felt something settle in him that had not been settled in a very long time. He had operated for years in a world that ran on leverage and power and the constant calculation of advantage. He understood that world completely, but he had never found, in all of it, what he had found in a coffee shop on a Wednesday evening, across from a woman who held her papers together badly and looked up with honest eyes. Something worth being careful with. He let her win the ginger argument. She knew he'd let her win it. She chose not to mention it. And they sat there in the warm, easy, extraordinary ordinary of an evening that belonged entirely to them. This is where we leave them. Not at a grand gesture. Not at a perfect ending wrapped in ceremony. But here, in the real, in the chosen, in the quiet proof that the love worth having is the one that shows up in the regular Tuesday of your life and stays. If this story reached something in you, don't just let that feeling dissolve. This channel exists for women, and the people who love them, who know that the most powerful stories are the ones that feel true. If you've ever loved someone who wasn't ready, if you've ever had to choose yourself when everything in you wanted to choose someone else, if you've ever had to exhale for the first time in years and realize you hadn't been breathing properly all along, then you already know what this story was really about. It wasn't about Devon losing. It wasn't about Jihan winning. It was about Kayla deciding. And in deciding, becoming. See, subscribe to this channel if you believe that women who choose themselves deserve to be celebrated loudly. Comment below and tell us the moment you decided to stop waiting for someone who wasn't coming. Your story matters here. This community is built for depth, for lived experience, for the kind of emotional intelligence that only comes from having actually been through something. You belong here, and the next story is already waiting for you.